Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm AndyRC and today I'm checking out a new package from Eachine. This is the Eachine Wizard TS215 and FreeSky X-Lite Ready to Fly combo. Now, I've already done a review on the TS215, so I'm not going to cover everything. However, they have made quite a few changes since the early version that I was sent, so I will be going over those. The biggest problem with the first one was the built-in DVR, and as you can see here, I ended up removing it. And that was because it added a load of latency to the FPV feed, making the model borderline unflyable. And it was also adding some processing on top of the camera, so it made the camera quality look terrible, even though the camera was a decent camera. But in the end, I still recommended it because it was really easy to remove the DVR, and underneath that, it has got some really solid components. And this time, I'm happy to say that they have fixed the DVR, and it seems to bypass the camera feed entirely. So there's no added latency, and the FPV feed looks, well, like any other FPV feed you would expect. It did catch me out at first, though, because I plugged the battery in and I was getting just a grey picture through my FPV goggles. But you can see on the side here that there's a little switch and it was in the off position. Now, you would assume that it would just turn the DVR off, but you don't get a picture when it's turned off, so that's something to watch out for. And then on the other side we have our micro SD card slot, and you have to provide your own micro SD card. I've been using a Class 10 32GB and that seems to work fine. And the DVR auto records as soon as you plug the battery in, and there's no buttons or controls on it, and it stops recording when you pull the battery, which is why we have these two big capacitors here, because those both store energy from the battery long enough for the DVR to stop its recording when you pull the battery and it powers down, in the same way that some FPV goggles do if you forget to stop the recording, and it's often known as a supercap. So the resolution of the DVR is 720 by 576 in a 4:3 aspect ratio, and it records at 30 frames per second at 8 megabit in the X264 format with AVI as the container. Now, a device like this always splits a crowd, because some people will say, well, what's the point of that low resolution when you can stick a HD camera on top? And then there's the crowd that isn't bothered by HD footage because they just want to watch it for themselves and they're not bothered about uploading it to YouTube or paying the forfeit of carrying more weight for the privilege of HD footage. And I respect either one of those opinions, and each to their own, right? The other thing that's changed is the camera and the mounting. So this time they've used a Runcam 2, and the mounting is a higher quality 3D printed material against the original TPU style 3D print material. And other than that, everything else is the same, but there are some standout features with this copter which I think are worth a mention. So we have the 2.3 stator motors, which are a really nice quality motor. And the EFCs are 32-bit, running D-Shot 1200. The flight controller is still built into the frame, which I know triggers a lot of people, and all I can say about that is I've used and abused the original version for testing other components, and it's not failed yet, and they do have it as a spare part. There's actually a lot of spare parts for this one. But I think the flight controller is one of the main reasons that people are put off by this copter. And they have actually made a negative change with this one. So a problem that copters have with these all-in-one flight controllers that are structural to the copter's frame is that vibrations come through the frame from the motors, and then that makes it onto the gyro, and you get jittery motors while you're flying. And the original Shuriken X1 had this problem. And they get past this in this instance by isolating the IMU on some silicon. But when I fired this one up, I was getting jittery motors at mid-throttle still. And that's because they have used a thinner and stiffer material for the soft mount. And the motor vibrations are still making it through to the gyro. Now, the fix is pretty easy. First of all, I used some motor soft mounts that actually came with the previous Wizard, and I'll link those in the below because they are pretty useful in general. And that got rid of 95% of the problem, which is enough for you to not notice it anymore. And I also very carefully, using a craft knife, cut off the silicon to the IMU and added some more spongy foam, and that sorted it completely. But be very careful when doing that because you can damage the circuit board. And I would say that if you are looking at this package as a whole, you don't really want to be doing that sort of thing. So I fed it back to Banggood and hopefully they can make a change there. Because, you know, this is a pricey model along with the X-Lite, and I want people to have a good experience. And while they have improved a lot of things with this model, this new silicon that they have used for the gyro is a downgrade from the original. And if you don't make the changes that I have, then you're going to get quite a lot of yaw jitters at mid-throttle when you are flying. So, moving on, and they are also still providing the TBS Triumph copy for the antenna, and just as before, it works, but it doesn't get the antenna high enough above the copter for a good video reception. So, I would switch that out for a taller one, and while on the subject of the connector, I really think it could do with being moved because the coax gets in the way of the USB port on the flight controller. Now, something that is very interesting about this package is the battery that it comes with, and it's really rare that a model comes with a LiPo these days because of shipping regulations. It's even rarer when that battery is a 5S, so that should be interesting. It's an Ishin branded 1550 ATC, and I do think that this battery, along with the Dow 5046 props that the model comes with, is underpropping it a little bit. And you do get a spare set of those props as well, by the way. You know, a 5046 prop is a borderline freestyle prop, and I think they may over-rev these motors on a 5S, but we shall see in the flight. Now, the receiver is the FreeSky XM Plus, and it comes pre-bound in the 1 to 16 channels, so I prefer the 1 to 8 channels for the lower latency. But yes, it's pre-bound to the XLite Transmitter, but without the RSSI firmware on there. Now, you get loads of stuff in the box, such as a bunch of landing feet and a large silicon mat, which I've already fitted. And you get given 4 battery straps and some carbon fiber spanners and some spare screws. And of course, the machine gun keychain, which some of you guys suggested is for gripping the motors with while tightening the nut. So thank you for that. And of course, we have the XLite Transmitter. And I know recently the XLite Transmitter has been really hard to get hold of, so hey, if you are in the market for a complete package, then maybe this is one way to acquire one. Now, it came with both of the sticks spring-loaded, and you are given the screws and the caps to sort your mode out. I'm a mode 1 flyer, so, you know, ignore that because the majority of people are flying mode 2. And I've actually reviewed this transmitter separately on the channel, so I'll link to that in the below. But you aren't given the case that you get when you buy the X-Lite on its own, and you are just given these stick protectors, and you have to provide your own 18500 batteries as well as a charger. Now, as I say, the model came pre-bound to the X-Lite, but oddly, nothing was set up really, so there was no model name, there was no failsafe set up, And the channel order is odd. I think they have used ATER instead of AETR. And that didn't match the channel order in Betaflight, so I had to go and modify that. And there are no modes set up in the transmitter, but there's no modes in Betaflight either. So I think I would have liked to have seen it set up more, because, you know, this is an RTF and it's not quite RTF. And the copter needs a full Betaflight setup, which I pretty much covered in my original TS215 video, so I'll link that in the below. So let's take a look at some FPV footage, and this is the goggles DVR, not the onboard DVR. I'll get on to that. And there's a little bit of video noise filtering through, but it's not too bad. Let's check out a speed run. So 101 miles per hour, this is a fast machine. However, I do believe that these motors are over revving slightly. Let's have another listen. Yeah, so it's nice on the ears when the motors rev high. However, it does usually mean that there's some inefficiency going there and some RPMs are getting lost, and I think a higher pitch prop would get even higher speeds than this. So when I put a 5S on my Ghost build from mode 2, it did like 125 miles per hour. Alright, it's a lighter copter, but yeah, I think a higher pitch prop would actually get more speed with this one. By the way, the audio that you are hearing is from the DVR on the goggles, so yeah, pretty nice audio that comes through if you are an audio person while you fly. However, the onboard DVR does not record any audio whatsoever, so let's take a look at that. Now, I found that the colours were actually richer than the DVR of the FPV goggles, although, you know, what I was seeing through the goggles was more accurate from the goggles DVR than the actual built-in DVR. And interestingly, the DVR that was on board the copter seemed to be adding a few frames, and I know that is the case because when I tried to sync it with the GoPro that's running on the ground doing the speed runs, then the DVR on board the copter actually needed slowing down to about 97%, whereas the DVR in the FPV goggles, it tends to drop frames because of video breakup, and I had to up that by like 1% or so. I usually have to do that in all of my videos to sync it up. But in short, yeah, the DVR on board still didn't sync with a GoPro on the ground, but you know, it's not too much of a problem. You know, I guess adding frames is better than dropping them, but it's worth a mention. The aspect ratio is slightly different than the DVR on the fat shots. If you're used to the fat shots, it's just a little bit narrower, and there are some slight black borders around the edge as well, but I don't think it's too much to worry about there. So, do I recommend this package? Well, I think it's a difficult one. I think the problem with the IMU is quite a tricky one. You know, it's an easy fix for me, but I don't think it's a fix that you should be having to do out of the box. Alright, it'd still fly without doing it, but you know, I think you get some mid-throttle oscillations, and you know, there are better packages out there for that. But I do think it's a good idea having a RTF with a transmitter, so like I say, I'm feeding that back to Ishin, and you know, if they give me any updates, then take a look at the description and I'll let you know if they are looking at changing that. But yeah, you know, this copter flew pretty nice on a 5S. I was quite surprised, and you know, it did sound really mean. Oh, the current meter wasn't quite right though. This is a 1550 milliamp battery, and I think when I landed it was showing, well, just under 1300, so that needs some calibrating, I think. But yeah, fast copter, and with a few changes, you know, you'll get a good flight out of it. So I'll link it in the below, and as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.